A former black police officer moved into a new upscale neighborhood. However, shortly after, his neighbor trespassed on his property illegally. A few days later, the officer did something unexpected to get revenge. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories your way. Thank you. Lincoln Chavez had spent 15 years in the force, seen the worst of humanity, and somehow still believed in the American dream. That dream, as it turned out, looked a lot like a 3-bedroom house with a pristine pool in a quiet Atlanta suburb. The kind of place where folks nodded politely at each other while watering their lawns and kids rode their bikes in the cul-de-sac. It was supposed to be peaceful. Supposed to be. Because Lincoln had only been in the house 3 days when he first spotted her. Karen Wright. A woman of impeccable grooming and permanent disapproval, wrapped in expensive cardigans, even when the Georgia sun threatened to melt the pavement. She stood at her window, phone to her ear, eyes locked onto Lincoln like he was some unsolved mystery she couldn't quite put her finger on. Lincoln, being a man raised on manners, did the natural thing. He lifted a hand and waved. Karen did not wave back. Instead, she turned away so abruptly her curtains billowed. Lincoln let out a slow breath. All right then. He'd dealt with plenty of tough customers in his time. Drunks who swung wild in bar fights. Teenagers who thought graffiti counted as self-expression. Even one old lady who tried to steal a neighbor's cat because it looked lonely. But nothing in his training had prepared him for Karen Wright. It started with the pool. Lincoln had gone out for a few errands, picked up some supplies to make the house feel more like home. By the time he returned, the security app on his phone had blown up with motion alerts from the backyard. And there she was, Karen Wright, in his pool, wearing an oversized sun hat, sipping from a thermos like she was at some 5-star resort she had personally booked. Her designer towel was draped over one of Lincoln's patio chairs, and, Lord help him, there was a floaty in the water. She wasn't just trespassing, she had settled in. Lincoln took a slow breath, pushed open the back gate, and kept his voice level. "Afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you?" Karen, to her credit, didn't startle. No shame, no guilt. Instead, she removed her sunglasses and smiled like he was the intruder here. "Oh, I thought you were the new pool maintenance guy." Lincoln blinked. "I'm not." Her smile widened. "Oh, well, the previous owners always let me use the pool. It's sort of a neighborhood arrangement." Lincoln folded his arms. "That right?" Karen sighed, giving him the patient tone of a kindergarten teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. "I'm sure they just forgot to tell you. They were very generous people." Lincoln's jaw tightened. "Yeah, well, they sold the house. And last I checked, that makes me the new owner. Which means if you want to use the pool, you ask." For the first time, Karen's expression faltered. She studied him, eyes narrowing slightly, like she was doing some calculations in her head and didn't like the answer. Then, with a small sniff, she climbed out of the pool, water dripping onto the stone patio Lincoln had just power washed the day before. She grabbed her towel, patted her arms dry, and said, "Well, we'll see about that." And just like that, she was gone. By the end of the week, Lincoln had a problem. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was the neighborhood menace. It started with small things. A few side eyes from other residents when he walked past. Some whispered conversations that stopped the moment he approached. The next-door couple who used to wave at him every morning suddenly had an awful lot of urgent things to do inside whenever he was outside. Then came the complaints. Anonymous reports to the HOA about his unkempt lawn. A notice about his excessive noise. But he hadn't had so much as a radio on past 9 p.m. And then, the cherry on top, someone called the police. Lincoln had been sitting on his porch, enjoying a cold beer after a long day when 2 squad cars rolled up. "Sir, we got a report about a suspicious individual in this residence." Lincoln didn't even have to ask who made the call. Karen was peeking through her curtains with the biggest smile he had ever seen on a person who wasn't on a winning lottery ticket. Lincoln sighed, set down his beer, and stood up. "Yeah? What'd the report say?" The younger officer, Martinez, according to his badge, shifted uncomfortably. Just that someone was in the backyard and they weren't supposed to be there. The older cop, Davis, took one look at Lincoln and exhaled sharply. Ah, hell, Lincoln. This your place? Sure is. Martinez blinked. Wait, you're Lincoln Chavez? The Lincoln Chavez? Lincoln gave him a flat look. Didn't realize I had a fan club. Davis smacked his partner on the arm. Jesus, kid. He was with the department for 15 years. Best damn de-escalation officer we had. Martinez immediately looked like he wanted to melt into the asphalt. Karen, watching from behind her curtain, vanished so fast it was like someone had yanked her out of sight with a fishing pole. Davis sighed. All right, look, we'll file this as a false report, but if this keeps happening, you should go to the HOA. Lincoln nodded, but he knew better. The HOA president played tennis with Karen every Tuesday. If he wanted to deal with this problem, he'd have to handle it himself. Lincoln had seen plenty of bold criminals in his time. Bank robbers who walked out of a heist like they were leaving a grocery store. Shoplifters who argued about prices while stuffing merchandise under their shirts. Even one guy who tried to break into a police station because he was testing security measures. But Karen Wright? Karen had a level of audacity Lincoln had never encountered before. Because the very next weekend, after calling the cops on him, after watching that plan go up in flames, she did something so ridiculous, so absolutely mind-boggling, that for a full 30 seconds, Lincoln just stood there, staring out his bedroom window, trying to process the stupidity unfolding in his own backyard. Karen had invited guests, and not just one or two, an entire group of women, sun hats, oversized sunglasses, designer swimsuits, lounging by his pool, sipping from insulated tumblers like this was some damn country club cabana. One of them was on a pool float, drifting peacefully. Another was rubbing sunscreen onto her legs. A third had brought a charcuterie board on his patio table. And right in the center of it all, like a queen holding court, sat Karen Wright. Lincoln exhaled, slowly. He pulled on a shirt, walked downstairs, and stepped out onto the patio. No one looked up. He cleared his throat. Ladies. Karen took a long, leisurely sip from her cup before turning to him with the kind of bored expression one might give a waiter who had just informed them they were out of their preferred wine. Oh, Lincoln, she said, waving a manicured hand. Didn't see you there. He looked around. That so? Must be hard to spot me from my own house. Karen smiled, unbothered. We're just enjoying a little afternoon dip. The sun is brutal today. Lincoln crossed his arms. You're trespassing. A blonde woman sitting at the edge of the pool shifted uncomfortably. Karen told us she had permission. Karen waved a dismissive hand. Oh, don't be dramatic, Lincoln. The pool was meant to be used. She gestured toward the water. And honestly, it's a shame it sits empty so often. What a waste. Lincoln felt his blood pressure spike. You know what else is a waste? Me standing here having this conversation instead of calling the cops. Karen sighed, loudly, like he was the problem in this situation. There's no need for that. I'm sure we can be civilized. Civilized? Lincoln barked out a laugh. Karen, you're sitting on my patio furniture, drinking from my cups, hosting a full-blown pool party in my yard, and you're telling me to be civilized? One of Karen's friends was already gathering her things. I think I should go. Karen shot her a look. Beth, sit down. Beth sat down. Karen turned back to Lincoln. Listen, Lincoln, there's really no need to escalate things. Oh, but see, Lincoln said, smiling just enough to be unsettling. That's where we disagree. Karen tilted her head. Lincoln pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolled for a second, then hit dial. The way Karen's expression shifted from arrogant confidence to realization to thinly veiled panic was something Lincoln would cherish for years to come. You wouldn't, she said. Lincoln didn't answer. He just smiled and held the phone to his ear. All right. Karen threw up her hands. We're leaving. Beth and the rest of the women practically tripped over each other, gathering their towels, their wine glasses, their plates of fancy cheese. As Karen stormed past, she muttered, "This isn't over." Lincoln, still holding the phone to his ear, grinned. "Oh, I hope not." If Lincoln thought that would be the end of it, he was dumber than the rookie cops who tried to outdrink him on poker nights. Because Karen wasn't just persistent, she was vindictive. Lincoln had dealt with criminals who held grudges before, career shoplifters who refused to go down without a chase, con men who swore they'd get even one guy who tried to egg his squad car after being arrested for public urination. But nothing could have prepared him for the level of petty warfare Karen Wright was capable of. She didn't just hold a grudge, she nurtured it, fed it 3 meals a day, and gave it vitamins. Within a week of her humiliating retreat from his pool, she had launched a full-scale campaign against him. It started small, a few muttered comments at the mailbox when she happened to run into other neighbors, little things meant to plant seeds. "Oh, I just worry. He's so secretive." Or, "I saw him outside at all hours. Very odd behavior." Then, as expected, it escalated. Suddenly, the neighborhood Facebook group, something Lincoln had barely glanced at since moving in, was flooded with anonymous posts about a certain new neighbor. The accusations weren't outright, just vague enough to make people uneasy. "Has anyone noticed the new guy keeps his blinds closed all the time? What's he hiding?" Or, "Late-night visitors? Maybe just friends? Maybe not?" The worst ones always ended with, "Not saying he's up to no good, but shouldn't we be concerned?" Lincoln sat on his porch one evening, scrolling through the posts, sipping a beer, and let out a slow exhale. Karen wasn't just trying to annoy him. She was trying to turn the whole neighborhood against him. That was when he realized something. This wasn't about the pool. This wasn't even about him. This was about control. Karen had spent years lording over this neighborhood, dictating what was and wasn't acceptable, deciding who fit in and who didn't. She had gotten away with it for so long that when someone finally told her no, she didn't just take it personally. She took it as a challenge. And if Lincoln didn't push back, she'd make his life hell until he either submitted or packed his bags. That was never going to happen. The first real sign that things had gone from petty to criminal came the next morning. Lincoln stepped outside to find his rose bushes, once full and thriving, reduced to withered, yellowing stems. The air had that faint, sharp tang of chemicals, and when he bent down, the soil was still damp. Someone had poured weed killer directly into his flower beds. He didn't need to guess who. He went back inside, pulled up his security footage, and fast-forwarded through the night. At 3:14 a.m., the motion sensor caught her. Karen, hood up like a cartoon villain, tiptoeing across his yard, a spray bottle clutched in one hand. She moved quickly, spraying the flowers, pausing only once to glance up and down the street like she was committing international espionage, then vanishing back into the night. Lincoln didn't feel anger. He felt satisfaction. Karen had just given him all the evidence he needed. That Saturday, the HOA held its monthly neighborhood meeting, and for the first time since moving in, Lincoln decided to attend. He arrived early, took a seat near the back, and waited. Karen, of course, was already there, sitting near the front, posture pristine, her expression the perfect mask of neighborly concern. The moment the meeting started, she raised her hand immediately. "I think we need to discuss the, recent changes in the neighborhood." The room went quiet. The HOA president, a balding man in his 60s, sighed. "Karen, what are you talking about?" She turned in her seat, scanning the room as if she were making eye contact with each and every resident, her voice filled with feigned concern. "I just think we should all be aware of who moves into our community. There have been concerns." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She pressed a hand to her chest, adopting the kind of faux sincerity only the truly insufferable could master. "I don't mean to be alarmist, but when people don't respect our neighborhood's values, it affects all of us. Property values, safety, our peace of mind." Lincoln, watching from the back, took out his phone and scrolled to his favorite new video file. He tapped the screen, connected it to the meeting's projector, and pressed play. On the big screen, Karen appeared in full color, hunched over his roses, spraying poison with all the stealth of a raccoon digging through trash. The room fell dead silent. Karen's face drained of color. Lincoln leaned back, stretching one arm over the back of his chair. "Speaking of neighborhood values," he said casually, "you think trespassing and property damage fits?" Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like a goldfish trying to form a coherent sentence. Someone in the crowd, maybe Mrs. Rodriguez, snorted. Karen spun to the HOA president. This is taken out of context." "Oh?" Lincoln raised a brow. "So you weren't killing my plants in the middle of the night?" Karen floundered. I was checking for suspicious activity." The laughter started low, then spread like wildfire. Karen shot to her feet, knocking over her chair. "I will not be treated like this. I am a respected member of this community." "Yeah?" Tom from 2 doors down muttered. "Respected by who?" Karen stormed out. The HOA president rubbed his temple and let out a long breath. "Jesus Christ." Meeting adjourned. Lincoln watched Karen shove her way through the double doors, her shoulders tight with rage and humiliation. He should have felt satisfied, but Karen was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals always fought back. 2 nights later, Lincoln found out just how far she was willing to go. It was a little after midnight when he stepped outside for some air, stretching his legs after watching a late-night movie. The street was quiet. The sky was clear. For once, it seemed like things had finally settled down. Then he looked at his pool. The entire surface, crystal clear water he had meticulously maintained, was now covered in thick, foamy white bubbles. Karen had dumped dish soap into his pool. Lincoln inhaled deeply, then let it out, slow and controlled. He had 2 options. He could lose his temper, start a screaming match with a woman who thrived on drama, or he could teach Karen a lesson she would never, ever forget. Lincoln had been patient, more patient than most men in his position would have been. He had ignored the gossip, endured the false police reports, and even tolerated Karen's ridiculous attempts to paint him as some kind of criminal lurking in their pristine little neighborhood. But this? The pool stunt? That was the last straw. He stood on his patio, hands in his pockets, watching the thick foam drift lazily across the water. The smell of dish soap was sharp in the warm night air. His pool pump would have to work overtime to clear it, which meant at least 2 days before he could use it again. Lincoln exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the irritation. Losing his temper wouldn't do a damn thing. No, if he wanted to deal with Karen right once and for all, he'd have to get creative. Lucky for him, he had a plan. It started with a memory, something his old partner on the force had once mentioned during a late-night stakeout. Some company had developed a temporary dye for pool maintenance, a chemical used to detect leaks. Completely harmless, totally non-toxic, and best of all, entirely invisible until it reacted with certain compounds. Compounds found in expensive sunscreen. Lincoln almost laughed out loud. Karen and her friends practically bathed in the stuff before they ever stepped foot in his pool. Designer creams with SPF 50, overpriced serums that promised eternal youth, whatever they slathered on their faces before their illegal swims, he was willing to bet it would be just enough to trigger the reaction. By the next morning, Lincoln had done his research. The dye was widely used in professional pool cleaning, perfectly safe, and, when mixed correctly, would create a bright, unmistakable green stain that would take at least a week to fade from skin. Not permanent, not dangerous, but humiliating? Oh, absolutely. It was the perfect plan. Lincoln ordered the dye online, paid for expedited shipping, and spent the next few days testing the formula. He took a small bucket of water, added a few drops, and mixed in a little of the fancy sunscreen Karen always left behind on his patio chairs. Within seconds, the water darkened, and when Lincoln dipped his hand in, It came out stained a rich, glowing green. Beautiful. That Friday, Lincoln put the final steps of his plan into motion. First, he installed 3 additional security cameras around the pool, one on the fence, one near the back porch, and one cleverly hidden in the bushes. He wanted every angle covered. Then, early Saturday morning, he left the house on purpose, making sure to be seen by a few nosy neighbors as he drove off. Sure enough, Karen took the bait. By 2 in the afternoon, Lincoln's phone buzzed with motion alerts. He parked down the street out of sight and opened his security app. There she was, Karen Wright, once again strutting into his backyard like she had a deed to the place, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and an expression of complete entitlement. Her friends weren't far behind, carrying towels, insulated tumblers, and a Bluetooth speaker. They set up camp immediately. Wine poured, sunglasses adjusted, gossip exchanged. Then came the sunscreen. Lincoln watched as each one generously applied their overpriced creams, completely unaware that they were sealing their fate. Karen was the first to dive in, cutting through the water in a lazy backstroke. Karen drifted across the pool, stretching her arms above her head like she was starring in a luxury resort commercial. Her friends followed one by one, easing into the water with contented sighs. The laughter was light, the wine was flowing, and the Bluetooth speaker hummed with some soft jazz number that would have been perfectly at home in a high-end hotel lounge. For the first few minutes, everything was exactly as Karen intended. The women floated, gossiped, and soaked in the afternoon sun, secure in the belief that they had won again. Lincoln wasn't home. The pool was theirs, and all was right in the world. Then it started. Beth, the first to notice, furrowed her brows and stared at her hands. She rubbed her fingers together, frowning at her palms, before turning to the woman beside her. "Lisa, does my skin look weird to you?" Lisa, lazily sipping from her tumbler, glanced over. "Huh?" Beth held up her hands. "They look green." Lisa laughed, shaking her head. "You probably just need another drink." But then she noticed her own arms. A deep, creeping emerald tint was spreading from her fingertips, darkening with each passing second. Her breath caught and she jolted upright. "Wait, what the hell?" The water rippled as the others stirred, glancing down at their arms, their shoulders, their faces, and then the screaming began. Karen sat up on her float, a lazy smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, come on. You all are so dramatic, it's just the—" She stopped. Her eyes locked onto her own hands, now a distinct, vivid green. Her jaw dropped, and for a second, no sound came out. Then, a shriek, a pure, unfiltered wail of horror. The float tipped over as she lunged out of the water, scrambling toward the pool's edge. The others were already there, clawing at their skin, rubbing frantically, trying to scrub away the impossible color. But it wasn't fading. If anything, it was getting worse. "My face! Oh my God! My face!" Lisa shrieked, grabbing for her phone to use as a mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, a streaky green disaster. "My arms!" Beth was near tears. "I have a client dinner tonight. What is this?" One of the women had gone full panic mode, running toward Karen, shaking her by the shoulders. "What did you put in the pool? What did you do?" Karen, still dripping wet, looked like she was about to faint. It's not me. It's something in the water." From the back porch, the tiny red light of a security camera blinked cheerfully. Lincoln, watching from his phone in the front seat of his truck, leaned back and grinned. The chaos spread beyond the backyard in record time. A stampede of half-dressed, green-streaked women bolted through the neighborhood, shrieking, clutching towels around themselves, spreading panic like a bizarre, privileged apocalypse had just descended upon them. One woman tripped over a flower pot and nearly face-planted into Mrs. Rodriguez's bushes. Another, still dripping wet, flagged down a jogger and begged him to check if she was turning into the Hulk. But nothing compared to Karen. She stumbled down the street, hair plastered to her forehead, face blotchy with deep green streaks, shrieking into her phone at someone, her husband, her dermatologist, God himself. Lincoln didn't know. Lincoln took his time parking in his driveway. He stepped out, stretched like a man who had just had the most peaceful afternoon of his life, and made his way to the backyard. A few stray wine glasses were still on the patio. A towel had been abandoned near the pool steps. The water itself was crystal clear once again, innocent as ever. Karen's back door slammed, and she came storming across the lawn, phone still clutched in her fist. Her green-tinted face was contorted in pure rage. "You did this!" she screeched, jabbing a finger at him. Lincoln raised a brow. "Did what?" This. She gestured wildly at her stained arms. "You put something in that pool, and you know it." Lincoln let out a slow, exaggerated sigh, shaking his head. "Karen, that's a serious accusation. You might want to be careful throwing that around without proof." Her mouth opened and closed, seething with fury, but no words came out. "I mean," Lincoln continued, strolling toward the back porch, "you were trespassing. Again. And it just so happens that my security cameras caught the whole thing. And you know," he mused, "I'd hate for your real estate clients to see something like that. Might not be great for business." Karen froze. For the first time since this entire war had started, she had no comeback. No clever excuse, no half-baked lie, no thinly veiled threat. Because she knew Lincoln was right. And worse, she knew he had won. By nightfall, the video had gone viral. Lincoln hadn't even needed to upload it himself. One of the neighbors had caught the hysterical green-streaked exodus on camera and posted it to the neighborhood Facebook group. From there, it spread like wildfire. The footage of 6 hysterical, green-streaked women fleeing Lincoln's backyard spread faster than wildfire on a dry summer day. The local news stations picked it up within 24 hours, turning it into a cautionary tale about trespassing gone wrong. Karen had spent years crafting her image as a respectable, influential member of the community, but overnight, she had become something else entirely, a joke. The comment sections were ruthless. "If I had a nickel for every entitled HOA president who thought they owned the whole neighborhood, I'd have enough to buy a house without an HOA. Why does every Karen story involve breaking into someone else's property like they're above the law? Imagine thinking you could use someone's pool without permission, and then suing him when you got caught. The audacity. The worst part? You know she's gonna play the victim." And sure enough, she did. Karen tried everything to salvage her reputation. She posted a long, emotional message in the neighborhood Facebook group claiming she had been misunderstood and that the green pool dye incident had been an unfortunate accident. She insisted that Lincoln had maliciously tampered with the water and that she had been unfairly targeted. It did not go well. The responses came in faster than she could delete them. "Karen, you literally broke into his yard. There's video." How exactly do you accidentally end up in someone else's pool? You harassed this man for months. You're lucky he didn't press charges. Karen fought back. She doubled down, claiming that Lincoln had deliberately poisoned her and her friends, that he had created an unsafe environment, and that the entire neighborhood should be concerned about the kind of person he was. Lincoln didn't even have to respond. The security footage spoke for itself. It didn't take long before Karen's past began to catch up with her. As the internet picked apart the video, people started digging. And what they found wasn't pretty. Karen had a history, not just in this neighborhood but in several before it. Stories surfaced of previous HOAs where she had been just as insufferable, just as controlling, just as entitled. Former neighbors from 3 different states came forward with eerily similar tales of Karen's meddling, false complaints, and power-hungry antics. We lived next to her in Houston. She once called the cops on my teenage son for loitering in our own driveway. She tried to get our backyard swing set removed because she thought it cheapened the property values. She's been doing this for years. It was only a matter of time before someone finally put her in her place. And then came the real damage, the one thing Karen hadn't been prepared for. Her job. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor with a superiority complex. She was a real estate agent, and when her company's social media page was flooded with links to the video, they had no choice but to respond. A carefully worded statement was posted within days. At Wright & Associates Realty, we pride ourselves on integrity and professionalism. The actions shown in the recent viral video do not reflect the values of our company. Effective immediately, Karen Wright is no longer affiliated with our firm. Karen was fired. For the first time in God knows how long, she had no authority, no leverage, no way to control the narrative. And that's when she did what all entitled people do when they realize they've lost. She tried to sue. It was almost comical how fast her case was dismissed. Karen accused Lincoln of deliberate sabotage, emotional distress, and public humiliation, claiming that his vindictive behavior had caused her to suffer irreparable damage to her reputation and career. Lincoln simply handed his lawyer a folder of evidence: the security footage of Karen breaking into his yard, the HOA complaints she had filed against him with no legal basis, the weed killer incident, the dish soap attack on his pool, the screenshots of her own words in the neighborhood Facebook group, where she had openly mocked him, gossiped about him, and tried to turn the entire community against him. The judge didn't even let it go to trial. Karen's case was thrown out immediately, with a not-so-gentle warning from the court that she should reconsider wasting legal resources on personal vendettas. Karen stormed out of the courthouse, still faintly green around the edges, humiliated and furious. She had lost. Completely. The neighborhood, once hesitant to take sides, finally turned on her for good. The same people who had nodded politely at her gossip now avoided eye contact when they passed her house. The whispers weren't about Lincoln anymore. They were about her. She called the cops on him, and he's the bad guy. Remember when she made a fuss about the Johnsons' Halloween decorations? Said they didn't fit the aesthetic. Honestly, the neighborhood feels better without her running everything. One by one, the people who had once stayed silent started speaking up. They shared stories of petty HOA fines, unnecessary complaints, and the way Karen had bullied anyone who didn't fit her idea of acceptable residence. She had spent years trying to control the neighborhood. Now, she had completely lost it. The "for sale" sign in front of Karen's house stood tall for 3 long weeks. It was a strange thing seeing it there, like spotting a crumbling statue of some former dictator, a reminder of a reign that had finally ended. At first, the neighborhood watched with cautious anticipation. Would she actually leave? Or was this just another stunt? Would she drag this out, make it messy, find some way to weasel her way back into their lives like a bad HOA rule no one remembered voting for? But as the moving trucks arrived and Karen's belongings were loaded one box at a time, the reality of her departure finally sank in. Karen Wright, queen of neighborhood gossip, tyrant of the HOA, self-appointed guardian of community values, was gone, and no one was even a little sad about it. Lincoln woke up early the morning of Karen's departure, partly because he wanted to see it with his own eyes, and partly because he was pretty sure someone had planned a farewell celebration that involved a suspicious number of lawn chairs set up along the street. Sure enough, by mid-morning, a few neighbors had conveniently positioned themselves on their front porches, sipping coffee and pretending to be deeply invested in their newspapers while stealing glances at Karen's driveway. Rodriguez, always one for subtlety, had brought out a full pitcher of lemonade and set up a folding table right on the sidewalk. Karen, face still carrying the faintest tint of green under her carefully applied makeup, avoided looking at anyone. She moved like a woman trying to disappear into her own shadow, barking orders at the moving crew, pacing beside her car as if she could will the whole ordeal to be over faster. Lincoln, coffee in hand, leaned against his mailbox and watched the show. As the last box was loaded, Karen yanked open her car door, but before she could climb in, a voice called out, "You take care now, Karen." Lincoln said it casually, like he was wishing an old friend farewell, but there was no mistaking the undertone. Karen froze for half a second. just long enough for her grip on the car door to tighten. Then, without a word, she slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. The neighborhood watched in silence as her car pulled away, turned the corner, and vanished from sight. For a few beats, no one moved. No one spoke. Then, someone clapped. It started slow, like the awkward kind of applause at the end of a bad school play. Then another person joined in, and another, until suddenly the entire street was clapping, laughing, cheering. Mrs. Rodriguez actually popped open a bottle of champagne. Karen was officially gone. And damn, did it feel good. With Karen out of the picture, the neighborhood went through a transformation. For the first time in years, HOA meetings were civil. No one argued over lawn heights or whether or not someone's porch decorations were too festive. The Johnson kids could finally ride their bikes without someone filing a complaint about reckless behavior. The air itself seemed lighter, freer, less suffocating. And Lincoln? Well, Lincoln finally got to enjoy his damn pool. It became a symbol, really. His backyard, once a battleground, was now the site of something entirely different. Every weekend, the laughter of kids splashing in the water, the clinking of cold drinks, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. He started hosting neighborhood pool parties, open to everyone who actually belonged there. Families who had once tiptoed around Karen's nonsense came together. People talked, laughed, shared stories. For the first time, Lincoln felt like part of something real. Not just a homeowner, but a neighbor among friends. And Karen? Karen became a legend. Her story lived on in whispers and inside jokes, in exaggerated retellings over backyard barbecues and late-night porch conversations. Remember the time she tried to claim the pool as community property? How about when she dumped dish soap in there like she was staging some kind of chemical warfare? Man, but nothing beats the green incident. At that, there was always laughter, because everyone remembered. Karen Wright, once the most feared woman on the block, would forever be known as the lady who turned herself green. Some said karma worked in mysterious ways. Lincoln just figured sometimes karma needed a little push, and he had been more than happy to give it one. This story is more than just a humorous tale of karma. It's a lesson in patience, justice, and the power of standing your ground. Lincoln's journey from a man simply looking for peace to someone who strategically dismantles an entitled bully is both satisfying and inspiring. His transformation is subtle yet profound. He doesn't lash out, doesn't resort to the same dirty tactics Karen uses. Instead, he lets her own arrogance be her downfall, proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing people to expose themselves. Karen's downfall is the perfect example of how entitlement and selfishness can ultimately destroy a person. She was so consumed with control that she couldn't see her own demise coming. Her actions not only led to her public humiliation, but also made her lose everything: her power, her reputation, even her home. At its core, this story teaches us a deeply human lesson. Respect boundaries, treat people with decency, and don't assume you're above consequences. In the end, Lincoln didn't just win back his peace, he built a stronger, more united community. And Karen? She became a legend in all the wrong ways. A fitting end for someone who never knew when to quit. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.